On Tap's Inside Racing, brought to you by Mitabite.
Welcome to Inside Racing. Most Australian race callers today present a no-frills, straight-up-the-middle description in keeping with the endless stream of races that go to air on Sky Channel and Sky Racing. Today's punters have so much to bet on, all they want to do is watch the race, listen to a straightforward call and get on with their next investment. A far cry from the days when radio stations covered 3 or 4 meetings on Saturdays only and the race caller became an entertainer. Many of you will remember the dynamic showmanship of the late Ken Howard or the side-splitting humour of the late Bert Bright. There's only one man still calling races in Australia who is representative of that golden era. His name is Jack Styring and he lives in the Victorian township of Gisborne. He's rising 73 years of age and still calls an odd meeting. I'm about to knock on his front door, but while I'm doing that, listen to a sample of his unique style.
And the favourite is levelling out for the run to the judge. Apollo Express at the distance, a little more than the length and a half in advance of Butcher Boy under the whip. Back in third place then is another Ming going to second, but Butcher Boy is going great guns. He's drawing right away from them, Butcher Boy, and he's going to win by as far as you can boot a jam can, and an empty one at that.
Jack Styring.
G'day, John, old mate. How are you?
Lovely to see you, Jack.
It's lovely to see you too.
I've been going to interview you for a long, long time, so here I am.
And at last you've made it. Coming out of the cold, mate, you look as if you're freezing.
I am freezing. Thanks, Jack. There's something friendly about a fire, Jack, and something that makes you reminisce a little, gazing into those embers.
There's no doubt about that, John. I think it's company. It's like another person in the room with you. It's so relaxing. You can sit back and have a read, and it's just so comforting. I enjoy the fire.
I know you still watch plenty of races and listen to plenty of race callers. Race calling has changed so much over the years.
There's no question, a doubt about that. I think the characters are not there as we knew them years ago, and race broadcasting has become somewhat a bit stereotyped.
Your interest in racing was cultivated from a very tender age. Your dad was taking you to the track at what age?
Well, I do recall vividly being there at the Melbourne Cup in 1935, so I'd be 6-year-old. And it was a pretty hard-breaking day for me, John, because I went out there with one express purpose in my mind, that Peter Pan was going to win his 3rd Melbourne Cup and Jim Pike was going to ride him. Well, Pike did ride him, but Peter Pan didn't win, and it cut me up quite a bit, I can assure you.
That was Marabou's Cup.
Marabou's Cup, yes.
And Peter Pan carried the grandstand in that, didn't he?
Yes, Peter Pan had well over 10 stone. But of course, I think also, John, he was possibly past his prime. He was an entire, and most entires at that age are finished, with the exception maybe of Burnborough, who was the exception.
Now, at what stage did the desire to become a race caller start to make its presence felt?
Well, I suppose it was long before I was 10-year-old, I think. My uncle used to go out netting yabbies, and he'd use them for bait. Well, what I used to do was pull the yabbies out of the can that he had them in, give them a dab of paint so I could identify them, and I'd call them by the horse names. And then we'd cut pictures out of the paper, and I think kids were very interested in racing in those days.
You'd have been around 16 or 17 years of age when you plucked up enough courage to take yourself off to radio station 3UZ to see what you could do about becoming a race caller.
That's about right, John. I was interviewed by John McMahon, and it was a very interesting interview. He could pick that there was an impediment in my speech, slight stutter, and he recommended I go round and see a fellow called Lee Murray. Lee was a marvellous fellow. He was almost like a father to me. He corrected the problem that I had, introduced me to Peter Bye, and Peter was calling the dogs. Peter was a journalist at the Globe in those days, and I was understudy for him at Napier Park in Strathmore, later Nelson Park in Geelong. Peter lasted about another 6 or 7 months, and I got the job myself.
You've called all 3 codes.
All 3 codes.
Were the dogs the toughest?
I suppose the dogs were, John. I didn't think the trots were much easier because a bit repetitious, as you know, but there was nothing quite like calling the gallops, because I think with the gallops you could develop a flair, which I attempted to do. I think it put a lot of interest into racing, and that was basically the style I developed.
Now, in the early 1950s, you got to work with a man destined to become a broadcasting legend. You understudied the late Bert Bryant.
That's correct, I did,
How did that happen?
Well, after I came back from Lee Murray's, Bert gave me the audition, and he said to me, I think you've come up all right, and gave me the opportunity. I didn't work with Bert for all that long, although I did call a number of meetings for 3UZ on my own. Then I saw the opportunity to freelance, and I went out and freelanced, and did it ever after.
What are your recollections of Bert Bryant, the man?
Well, I suppose Bert was a great character, a lovely fellow, great personality, loved a bet, and enjoyed a good time. But as a friend, he was a very genuine fellow. I had a lot of time for Bert.
Now, had he developed his very famous style at that stage of his career? You know, Bert's platform was to take the pain out of losing your money on the punt, to make punters laugh. Or did that come later?
It possibly came later, but he always had a bit of flair about him, Bert, and he was a very easy fellow to get on with. He had an easy style of calling races, and it was most unfortunate that how he had to go out. It was very, very sad.
He sent you to some faraway places on occasions.
Yes, I remember I went to do the races at Conniva. By gee, that was a trip. You left on the Friday night and you got home on the Sunday afternoon.
By train?
By train, yes.
Where is Conniva?
Conniva's up on the South Australian border. And they had a couple of meetings a year there, but all very hot and just a dusty old track. But you had to start somewhere, and that's where it all began, as far as the gallops are concerned anyway.
Now, in your capacity as a freelance race caller, you later got to work with another legend, the late Bill Collins.
Yes, I worked a lot with Bill. Well, as a matter of fact, how it all came about, Bill was at 3TR Sale at the time as breakfast announcer and race broadcaster. He remained as breakfast announcer, but he couldn't do the race broadcasting there because he took the job broadcasting on course at the showgrounds for the trots. So consequently, I used to go down and do the races for him at Sale and all those places in Gippsland, so that Bill could get up and do the trots in Melbourne. But he also used to like to get on the stand as well, because his father, Harry, was a bookmaker. And Bill would get up there and call the odds, and he was pretty flamboyant as a bookmaker as well, even though he never had a licence.
I think we might pause at this stage whilst I get ready for the second barrage of questions. And there are many more to come yet, Jack, so stand by whilst we take this important break on Inside Racing.
as they came along to poke their bibs around the corner, and Battle Pirate at the 250 is shot away. In second place then Crystal Wildwood, and back on the fence another Ming, and Seven Acres finishing well, but I'll give you the tip, brother, they wouldn't catch this fellow in a fortnight, and in the run of the judge going as straight as a gun barrel, Battle Pirate has won it well. African Idol got up for second, Crystal Wildwood.
The Australian Feed Company is dedicated to equine nutrition. Mitavite's steam extruded economics is for horse owners changing from more traditional forms of feed to an economical, no-fuss, energy-complete feed. Mitavite Economics provides unparalleled opportunities for performance horses. Mitavite, synonymous with quality and service in all equine disciplines.
Atunga Stud presents
Jungle Lyrics, Dennis are the inside, but Springsteen in front. Springsteen first.
an outstanding type and stakes winning 2-year-old Springsteen by Dane Hill, a sire of 5 Golden Slipper winners. He has a half-brother to Golden Slipper winner Marauding, also a sire of 2 Slipper winners. For a racehorse that's born to run, visit the boss, Springsteen, at Atunga Stud.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with much pleasure that I introduce for your exclusive entertainment a race play recording. And now let me introduce to you our racing commentator, Jack Styring.
Go there racing on the German handicap on one of the first...
Jack, back in the pre-video and pre-audio cassette days, owners didn't have the opportunity to relive their successes over and over again as we can today. And you were the first bloke to do something about that.
That's very true, John. Yes, I developed the idea of making records. I used to record on the city tracks, but outside the city tracks, and we would cut those records. I think originally they were 78s, then 45s and 33 1/3. That was a number of revolutions. And they were cut by a hot needle, and you could only do one at a time. I remember very vividly one occasion I was in Deniliquin, and a horse called Free had won a maiden handicap. Ron Morton rode the horse, and I got back to Melbourne that night, and I think it was probably the following morning, I rang up Bill Lomas. I got his name out of the book, and I asked him, was he Bill Lomas that raced Free? He said, yes. Well, I said, you know that horse won at Deniliquin yesterday? He said, no, I didn't. I said, would you like to know how he won? He said, certainly I would. So we played the race over the phone to him, you see, and he was ecstatic. He said, do you know something? He said, I've been going to New Zealand, he said, for 18 years, and I've been buying 2 yearlings a year, and that's the first time a horse has ever won prize money for me. He said, maybe better things will come. Within 2 years, he was the owner of Ripper.
Great mare.
And another one to follow, Lady Sybil. So it just goes to show you how things do work out.
Now, your talents weren't confined to the airwaves. You've always enjoyed writing about the sport you love so dearly. In fact, you've been a journalist of some note here in Victoria.
Yes, I guess so, John. Yes, I have written some stories about some great horses and some wonderful people. And I've always been in search of that fellow that could tell you something a little bit out of the ordinary. And I recall writing stories about the like of Ron Hutchinson, Scobie Breesley, a host of them, Ray Selkrig, and a lot of wonderful people that have been involved in racing. The Hoisted family, and so many.
I think the date was January the 6th, 2001. A very important day in the Jack Styring scrapbook. That was the day you called your 50th Gunbower Cup. Now, Jack, tell me firstly, where is Gunbower and how often do they race there?
Well, Gunbower is in the north of Victoria. It's east of Echuca, just off the Murray Valley Highway. And they have one race meeting a year there, and there's a harness meeting as well. It's very hard to describe, John, that particular day. The happiest day of my life, of course, was the day that I married my wife. But as far as from a professional point of view is concerned, nothing could ever surpass Gunbower.
They gave you a right royal send-off.
They certainly did. But it wasn't a send-off, John. It was a presentation, basically, because I think I'll stick around for a while longer. Even when the sponsor made his speech, he said, we'll continue sponsoring the race for another 5 years, if Jack Styring calls it. And the TV cameras, John, and the press, etc. It was something that I'll never forget. People came up with caricatures, presented them to me, lots of autographs, have a drink here and a drink there. No, it was something I'll never forget. It was a marvellous occasion.
We had a camera crew there on the day, Jack, and we got around and spoke to some of the race club committee men and people in the crowd, and here are a few examples of the esteem in which Jack Styring is held.
A lot of people get a great kick out of his sayings, and you know, there's a dog running across the course or coming at 100 miles an hour, or they couldn't catch him with the radio, you know, and all those little sayings. I think it's really good to hear him say them.
Oh, I suppose he's been coming for that long. We couldn't sack him after 45 years, so he sort of gets his 50 years, and people just keep coming to listen to him, and he's just a bit of a legend in country racing, I think.
He's a great man, been a good broadcaster.
How did you feel as the last horse moved into the barrier before the Gunbower Cup? Were you nervous? Were you excited?
Just slightly nervous, I think, John, simply because I knew the eyes were on me that particular day. It was a case of stand up and be counted, for want of a better word. And I do recall one horse played up quite a bit and held up the start. So that just made it a little, made me a little more apprehensive of it all. But we got through fairly well. Once the gates flew open, it was another race.
Right. I think we might listen to the closing stages of your call that day.
And danger with every stride. Up the head of the others, then is Stone Creek Road. And down the inside rail is Elephant Rock. And down the outside coming home well as Fate Surprise. And El Cordobi's inside the distance. And El Cordobi's has got to the front on the outside. El Cordobi's is doing better in the road of the judge. And El Cordobi's is going to win the cup. In second place, Stoneley Road.
Being a New South Welshman, Jack, I haven't had the pleasure of listening to you too much over the years. In fact, the first time I heard you on radio, I was driving around somewhere in Sydney with the car radio on, and there was a TAB meeting at Deniliquin. On came this race caller with a style quite foreign to the modern era. Clichés that I hadn't heard since the days of Ken Howard. It was obvious to me that you were a product of another era. And your style had never changed. You've never been prepared to upgrade your style or to do things differently to the way you were back in the 50s.
No, John, because I felt it was a successful start. It all came about basically, I was at the races one day, calling a field of 6. It was a mile race and there wasn't much pace on. And thoughts were going through my mind that this is a pretty boring sort of an affair. And I looked out the corner of my eye, and I thought I could see people looked as if they were bored. And there's still no pace on, and they've gone down to about the half mile, and I said, they're travelling that slowly, you'd keep up with this mob on a punctured bicycle. And I heard a bit of a roar come out of the crowd. So I thought, this is being accepted, we'll take it from here. And that's where a lot of the cliches came from, I think, from that particular day. And that was at a course where they no longer race Maroopna, which is near Shepparton.
Jack, it's pretty obvious that the late Ken Howard had quite an influence on you.
Oh, he did. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, the cliches, there are one or two that Ken himself used. I've heard you duplicate them. which many years on makes little difference. You know, the current generation of listeners wouldn't be aware that they were
Possibly
Ken Howard's
not, no,
cliches.
that's very true.
But I'd suggest to you that he had more influence on you than the Bert Bryants, the Bill Collins, or any of the others.
Oh, well, I think Howard, overall, Ken Howard was the best race broadcaster I've ever heard. And he was very, very lucky. Well, Sydney people were, at any rate. Oh, no, Howard was a wonderful race caller. He put feeling into racing, and I think that was so necessary. And I still think it is. Race broadcasting can become very, very boring if you don't try and open it up and try and entertain people. And that's what I've always attempted to do.
Mm. The TAB coverage of some of the meetings that you've done in recent years, such as the Deniliquin fixture, has taken you to a bigger audience in other states than you'd enjoyed previously.
Almost definitely.
Suddenly the name of Jack Styring burst into prominence. And I don't know if you're aware, but the first time you were heard on Radio 2KY in Sydney, the switchboard jammed.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that, John, at all.
They had a massive number of calls. The first time you did a Deniliquin TAB meeting, people were saying, who is this fella? Where does he come from?
That's very, very nice to know that, John. I know that I got quite a bit of feedback from Queensland. Somebody even went as far as to say they're going to develop a fan club, but whether that ever came to fruition, I'm not really sure. But I got a great deal of pleasure out of it, there's no doubt.
And people prospect down the outsiders coming home like the Sydney Express halfway down the straight and call to the deepest, go to the front. Look at Prince Alert out of the ground, and Prince Alert got up to beat the call to the deep.
Wake up to 2KY's Big Sports Breakfast and get a whole lot more.
We bagged the Broncos yet this morning. We don't have theatre-going, opera-loving, ballet-dancing listeners. We have sports listeners.
Make sure you're listening to 2KY's Big Sports Breakfast for your chance to win a trip for two to the AFL Grand Final. It's Sydney's only all-sports breakfast show. 2KY's Big Sports Breakfast. 2KY 1017 AM.
Been to many a racecourse, and you've seen many a fine performance from many a great horse. Is there one performance that stands alone in your mind?
Well, I suppose some of those great performances of Burnborough's would stand out, probably in any era. He was an incredible racehorse.
Any one race in particular?
Well, I suppose the Newmarket down here, and certainly I didn't see him win at Doomben, but the films of the race were quite sensational.
Did the near impossible in the Newmarket?
He did. Remarkable part about Burnborough is that Burnborough was one horse, probably the only horse ever to race in this country, that made turnstiles sing. And they sung in 1946 when 108,500 people were at Caulfield. And I'm sure 90% of them were there to see Burnborough.
Were you at Flemington the day he broke down?
Yes, I certainly was.
What a sad sight.
It was, but the most ironical part about that was, even a quarter of an hour after the race had been run, the winner had won very easily, Flight. People were asking who won it. As soon as Burnborough went, everybody looked to the top of the straight. There were no eyes on the winning post at all, with the exception of the race quarters.
Was he the best horse you saw?
No question of doubt about that. He was the best. I thought Tulloch as a 3-year-old was probably the best horse in the world at that time. He was an invincible racehorse at that time. And I think in that great campaign of Rising Fast, when he won 7 races in a span of 35 days, he'd just about get my vote for 3rd.
Now, rating the great jockeys is never an easy task.
I suppose it's not, John, but when George Moore, George Mully and Ray Solkrigg said that Derby was the best, and I saw Derby, I would readily agree with them. Munro was one jockey all on his own. The greatest jockey I've ever seen. We'll never see the like of Munro again. Some marvellous stories told about him. I was very lucky to be able to meet him in the twilight of his life. He was a great person and a great character, and didn't mind telling a story about himself. But he was a great jockey.
So what's Jack Styring doing currently from a race calling viewpoint?
Well, John, I'm kept reasonably busy. I'm only broadcasting a few actual race meetings, but I do all the Cranbourne trials. There's about 14 of those a year. I do the trials down at Werribee. Last September, there were 25 at one particular day, so they keep you on your toes.
Now, Jack, you clearly stated that the happiest day of your life was the day you married your good wife, Dolores. So I think we should expand a little bit on that. She has been a great supporter every step of the way.
There's no doubt about that, John. I think a lot of things that have happened, they wouldn't have happened but for her. That day at Gunbower, she was the entrepreneur supreme. She had arranged with the racing club to have a marquee, and there were several marquees on the course, but she had a special marquee there where she entertained people. She brought people to the races that had never been to a race meeting in their life before, yet alone Gunbower. And then she arranged a barbecue in Echuca the following day for quite a number of people. And it was something that I could never, ever forget. And I don't know whether I'm a successful man, but I've heard the quote, behind every successful man is a good woman. And there's no question of doubt, that is spot on. I couldn't have done it without her.
Is there a single regret? Anything you'd like another crack at?
Maybe just to do it all again, John, and I'd probably do it the same way. I've got no regrets. Been a marvellous life, and I'm still lucky enough and young enough to still be enjoying it.
Jack, I've no idea who holds the age record among Australian race callers. Des Hoisted hung up the binoculars recently from the Fairfield harness race meetings in his mid-70s. Do you have any idea who holds the record for the oldest race caller in Australia?
No, I wouldn't have any idea. I would imagine that I'm on the way, but I think there might be a couple still ahead of me, but I just don't know who they are.
You're rising 73.
That's right.
You're keener than ever.
That's about it, John.
You enjoy good health.
Fortunately.
If you're still enjoying the same good health and the same enthusiasm at 80, would you still be prepared to get up there and have a shot at it?
Most assuredly. I made a speech recently. It was to do with the 50th call of the Gunbower Cup. And somebody asked me how long would I go on. I said I'd be prepared to do another 50, but I think I'd need a pay increase.
Well, it's unlikely Jack will be around for another 50 years, but his legion of friends hope he'll be there for quite a